It's nefarious, man. Like, the brain works in fucked up ways.
The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh, human bodies on earth. I never have trusted my brain.
All of that weight lives in your head, and you are the decision maker.
Psychology of entrepreneurship. Hi, it's Ronsley. If this is your first volume, welcome. This is a weekly series where I go inside the mind of an entrepreneur, artist, athlete, academic to decipher what is the psychology of our decisions. So, in volume 2, way back when, I interviewed...
My name is Dr. Sherry Walling, and I am a clinical psychologist, but I work in the world of entrepreneur mental health.
Who spoke about our intertwined identities.
So there's the human, and then there's the business, and they're growing, and they're failing, and they're growing, and they're failing, and the two are somewhat intertwined. It's an extension of the self. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I think people can sort of say, oh, I don't feel like that about my business, but like on a neurological level, you do.
She's a smart cookie, and I recently interviewed her again in the aftermath of COVID-19, so look out for that addendum. But there is a disconnected link between the identities we don't want to let go of and living the happy, meaningful lives we'd like to live. I suppose it's time to ask ourselves the question, what makes us smile? Today, I'm speaking with someone who was originally a UCLA professor of psychiatry for over 25 years and a former FBI and police hostage negotiation trainer. His name? Dr. Mark Goulston.
You know, part of where I've learned what I've learned is I was a suicide specialist for many years, but I did house calls to dying patients, and I try to help them make peace with their lives at the end. And some of those were pretty successful people who at the end felt that they'd blown it. Because at the end, they felt, I remember one person said, everything I thought was important isn't, and everything I thought was unimportant is, and I'm out of time.
I know I said that Emily Fletcher was my last in-person interview. I lied. I forgot that I actually left New York and came to LA, and my last in-person interview was with Mark. We met at his office in Santa Monica. We didn't shake hands or hug. We sat a good 3 or 4 meters apart from each other at all times, and we followed the physical distancing rules.
And I'll tell you something else, because you're from India, that'll touch you. So, people email me, from around the world. And again, because of who I am, and I have organization challenges, so I'm just as likely to respond to an email from someone who's completely poor in India as I am to respond to a CEO from a Fortune 100 company. I got to figure this thing out, but I probably won't. And I remember there was this one young man who wrote to me from India. What was his name? Arun. And so, I guess I answered. He had a question. I said, Arun, and this is the power of just noticing people. I said, Arun, I have a question for you. What made you smile today? And he writes back, no one as famous as you has ever typed my name. So every day when I go to my computer, I touch the screen where you typed my name and typed your own name. That changed his life. That's how much doing so little can do. So, Ronsley, what made you smile today?
Well, to be honest, today I watched Dave Chappelle, the Kennedy Center Mark Twain Prize for American Humor on Netflix. That made me smile and cry a little. There is something about bringing together legends that make me kind of emotional. That's why I love the Avengers and Justice League, even the animated series and TV stuff. Anyway, Dave Chappelle getting the Mark Twain Prize made me smile. I loved it. Actually, that made me smile a lot. What made you smile today? And you remember Mark spoke about the person who said everything I thought was important isn't, and everything I thought was unimportant is, and I'm out of time?
And when I asked this person what he meant, He said, "I've got all the love that money can buy, but I'm not close to anyone. In the last 5 or 10 years, the way that I stayed relevant in the world is people came after me for my money and my connections because I did that 50 years ago to older people. And it's really exciting, but you can drop a marriage or two. You may be estranged from kids from your first or second marriage. Inevitably, at least 1 or 2 of your kids from those marriages have had drug problems because they're filling in for all the hurt, the fear, the anger, and the disappointment that you caused. And then when you get to the end of your life, sometimes you don't want to face the fact that you outsmarted yourself."
The regrets of the dying are only depressing if you think you are out of time. And being out of time can feel like eternity, especially if we are distracting ourselves and have to be busy every minute of every day. Don't get me wrong, I suffer from this too. It takes a lot of just sitting down and staring out of a window. The aim, I suppose, of doing nothing is the path to finding ourselves. There is no bigger gift to the people around you than the gift of you knowing yourself.
You know, there was a saying about, I think it was when Franklin Delano Roosevelt died and people were crying. There's a famous quote from someone where a reporter went up to someone who was just sobbing uncontrollably. And they said, "Geez, you're just crying so deeply. Did you know President Roosevelt?" And the person said, "No, but he knew me." Something about being known by yourself that is falling through the cracks of our world. And up until the coronavirus, we were able to distract ourselves by excitement. Keep busy, keep excited, and don't think about what might be missing.
We all know that comparing ourselves to others is a key factor in not feeling satisfied with our lives. But how do we stop? There's no magic solution, but social media can definitely play a big part in how we base where we are compared to those around us. According to an article posted in Forbes, the Happiness Research Institute conducted the Facebook experiment to find out how our social media habits affect our happiness. Half of the study's participants kept using Facebook as they normally would, while the other half stayed off Facebook for a week. At the end of the week, the participants who stayed off Facebook reported a significantly higher degree of satisfaction with their lives and lower levels of sadness and loneliness. The researchers also concluded that people on Facebook were 55 times more likely to feel stress as a result. The best way to feel satisfied with your life, according to almost every online report and research article, is to simply spend quality time with the people you love.
Mark Goulston, Dr. Mark Goulston, is an amazing human being. But like everyone else, like everybody else, there must be a backstory.
Everybody has a backstory. So, and I'm not sure if we went over this in our previous interview, but one of my greatest personal accomplishment is that I dropped out of medical school twice and finished. I dropped out because of untreated depression. And the first time I dropped out, what had happened is I was highlighting all of the books, but I couldn't hold on to the information. And so I took a leave of I was passing everything. I took a leave of absence, worked in blue-collar jobs, which I loved because they were so simple, and I just go home and I didn't feel useless. I'd done a good day's honest work. And then I came back, and it lasted for about, 3-4 months, and my mind came back, and then it went away again. So I asked for another leave of absence, and the medical school loses money every time a student takes time off. They lose matching funds. So tuition doesn't pay for a student. And so I met with the head of the school, the dean of the school, who's all about fundraising. I don't even remember that meeting. And I got a call from the dean of students who cares about students, not about fundraising. And what had happened is the dean of the school, I think, knew they wanted to kick me out, but he didn't want me killing myself. I didn't know this. I've all fit this together afterwards. So when I went to the dean of students, I was pretty broken. I was pretty low. I was like I was like you on the balcony, except, I don't know where I was heading. And he read this letter to me from the dean of the school, who said, I met with Mr. Goulston. We talked about another career, and I'm advising the promotions committee that he be asked to withdraw, meaning I was passing, so they couldn't kick me out. And I don't even know how I was passing, but I was. And I remember looking at the dean of students, and I'm pretty broken. And I said, what does this mean? And he looked at me and he said, you've been kicked out. And I'm not a religious person, but people would say you're spiritual, because I think a miracle happened. Because when he said you've been kicked out, I bent over like a gunshot wound. And I know what that's like. I had a perforated colon. I almost died from about 12 years ago. It was just like that. I went, oh. And then I felt something wet on my cheek, and I thought I was bleeding. So I started touching my cheek, started looking at my fingers, and I thought I was bleeding. I'm not even the right religion, by the way. And it was tears. And he said to me, so Matt, and I came from a similar background. You are what you produce. You are what you achieve in life. If you don't achieve much, you're not worth anything. And my parents were hardworking, but it was that depression thing, and it was what I did internally. So I felt, well, I can't do much. I must not be worth much. And so the dean of students said to me, and this is where I learned what you needed to say to little Ronsley. So he said to me, he said, you didn't mess up, but you are messed up. But if you got unmessed up, I think this school would be glad they gave you another chance. And I start to cry from the relief, like this is just compassion. It's kind of like what you were feeling in our little visualization thing. I mean, you didn't know who was crying. Was it little Ronsley, big Ronsley? Was it either of you? It really didn't matter. And then he said to me, even if you don't get unscrewed up, even if you don't become a doctor, even if you don't do anything with the rest of your life, which is what I thought I was capable of at that point, he said, I'd be proud to know you, because you have a streak of goodness in you that we don't grade in medical school. Maybe we should, but we don't. And you have no idea how much the world needs that goodness. And you won't know it till you're 35, but you have to make it till you're 35. And you deserve to be on this planet. And you're going to let me help you. So he arranged an appeal. So I met with the promotions committee, and I guess they saw something in me.
The power of believing in someone is quite immense, even if it is for a few seconds. I have a friend whose name is Dan Martell. He is an amazing human, brilliant coach, and legendary entrepreneur. He has an amazing story about when he hit rock bottom and landed in jail when he was in his teens, and about this one jailer who told him he didn't belong there. I think his name is Brian, if I remember correctly. And now Dan attributes a lot of his success to this jailer. Just like Paul here in the start of his TEDx talk about the power of believing in others.
Childhood isn't easy for any of us, especially an awkward child like I was. But the downward spiral for me came when I didn't know how to confidently assert myself, when I started to experience a lot of bullying. As the bullying continued, my temper got shorter, and I fought back, often physically, and then I fought first, eventually becoming the thing that I hated the most. At 14, I hit rock bottom. I picked a fight with the wrong guy, and he and his two friends sent me to the hospital with a damaged face and an even more damaged ego. In the hospital, I got an idea that changed my life, but not in the way that I expected. And the journey it has taken me on has helped me positively impact the lives of over 1,000 boys, girls, and young adults. I decided to start martial arts. My idea was just to become a better fighter, but what happened was so much more than that. There was one instructor in particular that I really looked up to. Not just because he was physically skilled, but because he believed in me at a time when I had no belief in myself. And he helped me find an inner strength that I never knew I had.
After the break, what made you smile today?
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
The main objective of this audio project is to bring together entrepreneurs and creatives who share similar values so that they can find the courage to put out their authentic voice for the right people to hear, which allows for them to make their impact on the world. Every great movement started with a memorable speech. For access to full-length interviews, go to psychologyofentrepreneurship.com and click the button.
Before the break, Mark's backstory, the power of believing in others, and the gift of knowing yourself. Now, a story. A story we've heard often in different ways, but somehow it doesn't seem to go down well for a variety of different reasons. Mark, do you remember a recent conversation about the power of your work?
In fact, there was one person, I can't tell you his name, but he was globally loved, although his personal life was kind of filled with divorces and things like that. And I remember I did a house call to him, and I guess these people felt relieved with me because I would just say things that nobody else would say. And what I said to him is I said, you look awful, and I don't think it's because you're dying, because you've been dying as long as I've known you. I said, what is it? And no one talked to him like that because he was like this god. He said, I don't think I've ever done anything important in my life. I said, what do you mean? You got a hospital named after you. You created industries with thousands of jobs. And he was the one who gave me the quote. He said, hey, don't con a con man, especially when he's dying. I've got all the love that money can buy. And I said, well, if I tried to convince you about how you've had a good life, it wouldn't work because I could list all kinds of things. I see them with all the awards behind you in the room doing that because I used to do house calls. And he'd say, nope, not now. And, I've trained hostage negotiators, so I'm pretty quick on my feet. And I think outside the box, not on purpose. It's just the way I am. And I said to him, there's a couple words I was thinking of using with you, but they're not very nice words. And I didn't think I'd get the chance because you're dying. I thought, I shouldn't use them. But looks like I get the chance. And the two words are psychopath and narcissist. And you could be both of them, and you could be getting exactly what you deserve. And he said, what? Because I think he was trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for him and trying to convince him he had a good life, which he was just going to just put down. And so he looked at me like a deer in the headlights, not unlike what you're looking at me like. And I just laid into him all the things that a lot of the people he'd left by the wayside, a lot of the people in his personal life. And after about 3 minutes, he looks at me and he says, stop. And I said, I was just getting started. And he said, I get it. And I looked at him, and despite what may sound rough, we had a good relationship because I could talk this directly. And I said, what is it? What is it that you get? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, this is not a good time for me to be asking these questions. I said, right. Pain control, morphine drip. You're not perfect. You're flawed. You're not evil. Get out of Dodge, and just go. And those are doctor's orders. So he smiled at me, and because he knew that's exactly what he needed to do.
A lot of the times we know what we need to do. We need to eat more greens. We need to be more active, have more conversations, smile more at people, do less of this, behave in certain ways, taste that. At the end of the day, I suppose it's all about what made you smile today.
So I've co-founded a movement. I have a TEDx talk. You can find it. And the movement is called What Made You Smile Today? And to be honest, I started it because I became a grandpa for the first time. And my grandson is just, I've never been this deeply in love. All the cliches they say about it are true. And I got a picture of him, and he lives locally, and it's just even saying it to you, I'm just visualizing him, and I'm just smiling. But my TEDx talk, which is What Made You Smile Today, go check it out. I hope you will. Yeah, and really, it's even though it sounds trivial, I learned how to do it from a friend who had a drug addict daughter, and he just kept texting her every day because he said, I'm avoiding her, which is only making it worse. But she's a liar and she's a manipulator. And he said, but I don't want to talk to her because she's always trying to con me out of money. And so he just started texting her every day at 5 p.m. Hey, honey, it's Dad. What made you smile today? And at first she tried to manipulate him and say, maybe you'll give me some money. And he said, no, we've done that. No. And he just kept doing it every day. And then after 6 weeks, she texts back, well, if you must know, Dad, what made me smile today was knowing you would text me. And he started to cry, and he said, that's the first time we really liked each other, where I lowered my guard and I didn't worry that she was going to try and manipulate me. And then a few months later, she was off drugs because, she felt like a burden, and she was. And she didn't feel like her parents liked her because they didn't. Ever since that time, what's happened, I'm going to give you a supply of them. Every day when someone has served me, like a TSA agent, a cashier, every day I carry with me these wristbands, which say hashtag WMYST, which stands for What Made You Smile Today, hashtag WMYST. And when someone serves me at a McDonald's or a TSA agent, I make sure that they're not rushed and stressed, and they're all a little bit stressed now. And it probably wouldn't work right now because everyone's uptight. But what I would say to them is I see their name. They have a name tag. They don't have a face because it's supposed to be friendly. They have a name tag. And I might say, after they ring me through, hey, Joan, thank you. My name is Mark. I have a question for you. And they always look like they're in trouble. And I say, no, you didn't do anything wrong. Joan, what made you smile today? They pause, they smile, and they go from being a function, an appliance, to being a person. And you're name to name. You have a relationship. And then they suddenly pause, and then they smile widely, and they say, it's a beautiful day, getting up, my kids, my dog, seeing you. And they just smile. They just brighten up. And I take out 2 wristbands, and I say, you got a great smile. Here's a wristband to remind you to use it every day. And here's a second one. Go give it to someone else. And you can go to WMYST.org. It's not about making money. It's about making the world happier one smile at a time. The world can use that, but I think I'd be hesitant now because people are just too scared. But, we'll get through this.
So I now wear a band around my wrist that is blue in color and has hashtag WMYST, which stands for What Made You Smile Today. And I have hundreds more to give away, which I will.
It's a great movement because what happens is after you do it, you leave, no matter how important you are or how rich you are, the fact that you just made someone a human being, you just made their day, makes you feel more worthy about yourself. I actually cared about someone who can't do anything for me. I was a good guy. I was a good gal today. I'll tell you, you can use it anywhere. I did it with someone from India who was helping me technically, and I was frustrated because I am 70 and I can hardly do anything technologically. And so after a rule finished with me, he said, do you have any questions, sir? It's all chat typed in. And I said, a rule, are you a robot or are you a human being? And he types in, I am a human being. I said, good, I have a question for you. And I could tell he was nervous. What is it, sir? And I said, a rule, what made you smile today? And he types back, today's my birthday. And then I type back, that's amazing. What are you doing? And he said, well, when I get off, my family and I are going to do something to celebrate. And I said, well, that is great. And so I went from a frustrated baby boomer to how I ended it. I say, give me your supervisor's email because I want to tell them just how patient you were with me, how you helped me solve something, and you were great.
The gift that keeps on giving. According to research from Emory University, when you are kind to another person, your brain's pleasure and reward centers light up, as if you were the recipient of the good deed and not the giver. This phenomenon is called helper's high.
Mark, you've done so many amazing things in your life. How are things like for you now?
Well, it's interesting because people will say, God, aren't you depressed? I mean, I am retired after doing this for 30, 40 years. But the reason I think I've been saddened by the pain of all the people I've seen, but I have not been depressed by it. And the reason being is I didn't know our little visualization would have the impact it did. But when I can be with another person and I see the relief and hope they feel, It doesn't get much better than that. Yeah. So when you see, when you're able to interact with someone and you can tell that they walk away feeling on the way to healing instead of just coping. I mean, it's pretty uplifting. It's interesting. I belong to a few groups, and there's one group in which the other members are men, and they're all monetarily really successful. And it's kind of a spiritual, religious group, yada, yada, yada. And I am less wealthy than the next person by tenfold. And we had some sort of a meeting, where people just opened up about things. And because I live in Los Angeles, it's sometimes easy to feel less than if you don't have wealth. Look, I'm not poor. I mean, I don't have debt, nothing to complain about. And what was fascinating is what they were talking about is they know how to make money, but they don't really know how to feel that something in life is meaningful. And they're great people. I mean, they donate more money than, I would ever make in my life. I mean, and they help things. And it was interesting because I went last and I said, okay, normally I feel kind of less than because if I measure myself monetarily, I'm the poorest here. And I said, but I'm feeling pretty good now because I don't know how to make money, but everything I do is meaningful. I mean, I didn't approach it that way, but everything I do is meaningful. I mean, there's a saying at the end of Schindler's List, whoever saves one life saves the world. And, and so, kind of like you, I'm allowing that to feel meaningful and just feel that. And, so, yeah, I mean, we're all on our own little journeys.
We are all on our own journeys. This is true. And in the aftermath of COVID-19, the biggest impact we will be dealing with is the one around mental health.
After Anthony Bourdain killed himself, I wrote an article which became part of an 8-part series, and it was called Why People Kill Themselves. And after he killed himself, I wrote this blog called Why People Kill Themselves, It's Not Depression. And what I said is that there's hundreds of millions of people who are depressed who don't kill themselves. There are many who do. Not many, but some. There's hundreds of millions of people lose their jobs, lose their marriage, and they don't kill themselves. Now, all those things can contribute to it. But one thing that nearly all suicidal people feel, which is what I spoke about in the article, is they feel despair. And if you break the word despair into DESPAIR, they feel unpaired with reasons to live. They feel hopeless without a future, helpless, powerless, useless, worthless, meaningless. And when they all combine, they feel pointless and they pair with death to take the pain away. So I think it's from that understanding and with the dean of students pairing with me is when you pair with someone in their hopelessness. And remember, he said, you don't have to do another thing the rest of your life, and I'd be proud to know you. Plus, he went to bat for me. I mean, he was just a PhD, and he stood up against the whole school to say, I think he deserves a second chance. And so I agree with you that if you go along with my definition, and by the way, that blog had 550,000 views in a week. That's a lot of views.
Those folks are the first responders. We're the last responders. But my colleagues and I, we're all doctors. These are our patients.
Signing off on every Milwaukee County COVID death is Brian Peterson, Milwaukee County's chief medical examiner.
Why is that important?
Closure. I mean, our families want to know.
To keep that work going without risk, there's been staffing changes.
Now we're running at about 1/3 to 1/2 of that at any one time. And the thought is that if somebody brings the plague to the office, not everybody gets sick. Because one thing we can't do is shut this office down.
And since the pandemic started?
It's been pretty steady since it started. I mean, a few days, a few more, a few days, a few less. But I think since this all began, maybe 6 or 7 a day is what the numbers have been like. We see a lot more spikes spikes when it comes to overdoses.
The numbers include information.
So we're talking in general older, more sick people who at any given day might be expected to pass away anyway. And perhaps this infection with COVID is making it happen a bit sooner than it normally would have.
And he has a concern coronavirus could be causing death a different way.
I think we're going to be seeing a lot more suicide, maybe even a lot more homicide related to unemployment and stress caused by everything being shut down. I saw my first one yesterday, but I'm expecting to see more of those.
In Milwaukee, Journée Mar, WISN 12 News.
That was the chief medical officer, and the report was done by WISN 12 News in Milwaukee. In volume 18, UJ Ramdas was talking about having cold showers every morning living in Toronto, Canada, where cold is a different kind of cold there.
Well, because it's efficient, first of all. Second, when I have a hot shower, it dulls me, and a cold shower sharpens me up. Right, so about 5 years ago, I nearly died in a motorcycle crash in Bali. Yeah, so basically, long story short, the reason I brought up the accident was I don't wish the accident upon anybody, but a huge lesson I learned, difficult lesson I learned, was pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
There's a big difference between pain and suffering.
And so, I think, pain is pain. Suffering is feeling alone in pain. And when you can take away the aloneness that people are feeling by pairing with people in their pain, not throwing solutions or treatments at them, but pairing with them, suffering they can't live with becomes pain they can. People can live with prolonged pain. Most people can't live with prolonged suffering. And when you can take the aloneness out and connect with them, like I said, suffering they can't live with becomes pain they can.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Coming up on the psychology of entrepreneurship.
I think a lot of people are struggling to grasp what's happening and can either get sort of pulled into distraction or are compulsively taking in news, trying to let it sink in, and then trying to know, how do you respond to something like this? Often the case in human experience, we're sort of drawn to one end of the spectrum or the other. One of the challenges that all parents are facing right now is the sense in which there's just not enough to go around. So when we're put under pressure, there are parts of us that shine to tolerate the feeling rather than try to move through it. There are lots of things to be done that can help soothe our anxious souls in very helpful and meaningful ways.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
I interviewed Dr. Mark Goulston because his book, Just Listen, ranked number 1 in 6 Amazon categories, has been translated into 14 languages, reached number 1 in Munich and Shanghai, and became the basis of a 2010 PBS special. The Consumers Research Council 3 times named him as one of America's top psychiatrists. He has also appeared on Oprah, The Today Show, The Phil Donahue Show, CNN, and hosted a PBS Pledge Drive special. He blogs for the Huffington Post, Psychology Today, Fast Company, and Business Insider. He contributes to the Harvard Business Review and writes a syndicated column for biz journals. He is an empath, a deep thinker, and a grandfather.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
This is a Must Amplify production. Special thanks to every guest expert that has appeared on the show. Voiceovers, editing, and sound design by Kelly Bonnyman. Guest research and content by Claire Gould and Corinne Castles. Project managed by Kelly Bonnyman. Produced and hosted by me, Ronsley Vaz. For more episodes and where to listen, go to mustamplify.com/POE.
Hey, it's Kaylee from Must Amplify. I'm the sound engineer for this volume of Psychology of Entrepreneurship. I'm part of the team that made this production come alive. I work as a part of a global team with our studios based in West End, Brisbane, Australia. If you would like a podcasting checklist, email me at kaylee@amplifyagency.media. That's KAILI@amplifyagency.media. We specialize in finding your voice and making sure it's heard by the right people. If you are considering whether a podcast is a good idea for your business, check out our other show on shouldistartapodcast.com. Are you still listening? Here's a little gift to you for sticking around.
At all times, and we followed the self, and how, and now
Your brain's pressure.